Going live. You're live, it says. Well, hello. Welcome, everybody. This is Behind the Scenes of AV Rant. This is episode number 664. Tom said you said you're away in not next week, but the week after, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually have to get a hotel room for that.
We have to change our numbering then, because you cannot be absent for episode number 666. That
we'll do 665.5 or
5.2 or something. That's right. That is absolutely the plan. Alrighty. Well, folks, this is the behind the scenes, so you're being warned that this is not the final version. There is a complete version that goes up later in the week. Probably not on Thursday this week, though. I'll have to try and get it done early. I'll tell you why when we start recording.
Exciting.
Isn't it, though? It really isn't. Let's see. What else? Okay. The few images we have this week will show up in this, so that's not really a problem. That's about it. But you've been warned. If anything glitches out during the course of this recording, it's because it's behind the scenes. You're just seeing the live feed. That's what happens sometimes. Okay, that's going. That's recording. Audio is recording. I think we're good to go.
Oh, it was my birthday, so I got a Fitbit. I should take this off.
Fitbit.
I did. I got a Fitbit, so I should take this off and whatever. I'm going to leave it on. How much battery does it have?
You're not going to be taking any steps for the next 2 hours.
53%. It's the thing lasts like 2 days, maybe max. My wife's little tiny Fitbit lasts for like a week.
I adjusted my camera. I might be super contrasty. I kind of look it on my screen, but can't tell.
Let me see here. Let me see what you.
Well, you won't be able to see on the Skype because the Skype is a different camera.
I can't even hear you anymore, so who cares? Right back. Hold on.
Oh, all right. Do. Yup. Dead air. Awesome for recording time. Yeah. If anybody's been watching, my YouTubeage has shown up extra dark. Not as dark as it looks on my screen while I'm doing the stream, so I'm overcompensating, perhaps. We'll see how it turns out.
Okay.
Violet must be in the room. That's what's going on.
Ugh. I have everything so freaking tight in here.
Mm-hmm.
Should just open it. You go, don't even eat that.
I assume Violet is in the room.
She is in the room. All right. Let's see where we are as far as I got to have this up. I got to scroll to the top again because I did go over some of the questions while I was waiting for you. And it is 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Halloween is approaching. And we're trying to line up those numbers. So Tom is away, not next week, but the week after, and so our numbers will have to be rearranged. But yeah, in the meantime, my voice today, I might at some points like pause for no apparent reason, but there is a reason. And it's because I had a filling fall out in one of my molars on the left side. So I have a what feels like a you know how it feels so much worse than it actually is.
I've had a filling fall out before. I've actually had a crown fall off before. You keep pushing it back on.
It feels like you've got a crater in your face, which obviously is not really the case, but it feels that way. So my dentist appointment is not until Thursday, when I normally post the completed version of this video. So I'll have to get it done earlier because I'm not missing that dentist appointment.
Lots of soup for you.
Yeah. There you go. I won't be doing much chewing on that left-hand side. I'll tell you that much.
Those of you watching the YouTube version of this podcast, if it looks like I'm looking over your shoulder, I'm looking past the camera at the dog to make sure she doesn't eat anything. Yeah. Don't eat that.
If anybody has been tracking our eye lines, I feel bad for them because I've got two screens going. I'm looking back and forth, looking at notes. So,
I know
we are pro when it comes to YouTube, folks.
Well, I mean, we would need like what you call them, those teleprompter things, and a producer.
Yes, an actual proper not just me handling all of it live. That's why, folks. Right. That's why
somebody to actually do it. Yes, as I know.
The whole YouTube thing was like a happenstance.
It's a complete it's an afterthought. Yes. Sorry, YouTube. Sorry, YouTube, but your comments suck, so that's what you get. You want better production value? Be less awful.
No, we are never promising better production at value. Doesn't matter what happens.
No.
All right. There you go.
We'd have to get a lot more listeners. All right. This is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to www.avrant.com. Leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. One of the best ways to get in touch with us other than email. YouTube.com/AVRant. And if you want to contact us directly, Rob@AVRant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom@AVRant.com. My Twitter is @AVRant_Tom.
Mm-hmm.
So let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to AVRant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. I'm tired of saying www. And honestly,
really
you don't actually have to put it in there.
You don't have to type that. Are we HTTPS yet?
I don't
Maybe that's why some people don't come to the website.
I think we're still on MySpace. I think our back
pretty close.
We're GeoCities. That's what our
we're
base
Angel
is.
Fire.
Angel
Remember
Fire.
Angel Fire? I had an Angel Fire website. That was the first
did not.
website I ever made. Was an Angel Fire website. I never updated it past once. Might still be out there for all I know.
I had a MySpace page. I don't know that I did anything with it, but I had one for a while. I don't remember.
I heard somebody pronounce the thing Geocities. And I'm like, what? Geocities? Who says that is?
No one has ever said
I
that
heard
before
somebody
that
pronounce it that way, so that's what's out there.
That person's wrong.
You are warned, world. There are people out there who pronounce it Geocities.
Millennials are ruining everything.
I don't think it was a millennial.
Boomers are ruining everything. Somebody's ruining it. It's not Gen X, because that's what I am. All right. I think I'm Gen X. Yeah. So one of the ways you can support the podcast is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Kevin for doing that. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you for that donation. We appreciate it.
We also want to thank our 86 patrons over at patreon.com.
Indeed, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up, it's an automatic monthly donation. Just choose the amount, and it will automatically be withdrawn from your account every month and given to us. So thanks to our 86 patrons over there.
All right. I got to adjust the AC. Roasting in here. It was fine. It's like close the door, and now it's miserable. I've got these two lights. I mean, and they're even LED lights, and they're supposed to be cool, and they're cool to the touch, but they still warm up the room.
It's the end of September or beginning of October.
It rained for the first time in like a month and a half here, and everybody's grass is just like soaking it all up. But it's been actually not so bad. It's been high 80s, low 90s. So for Florida, that's positively.
Yep, that is
fine.
That is not okay. I would never live there.
I would never have lived here either, but I didn't get much of a choice. My wife says, "Do you want to stay with me, or do you want to go someplace else?" I'm like, I guess I'll stay with you. I mean, I guess if I have to. What about the kids? Well, if you leave, you have to take the kids. Well, then I'm definitely staying with you. All right. Went shopping for my son. My youngest son's, he's 10. His Halloween costume.
Oh, yeah.
I finally convinced one of my sons not to buy a pre-made crap costume thing. So we got like the cheapest little, robe-looking thing, and we bought like accessories for it. And he got like this Cobra Commander mirrored mask that he wears underneath this sort of black veil that's in this hood, this like hood thing, and it's creepy as like you look in there and you can't, it's like it's nothing. You can't see anything in there. And he can see you, but you can't see anything. Everybody, the dog freaked out. The dog was like, a monster has entered our abode. Nice. And I will bark at it and run away because I am very small and helpless. But it looks pretty good. He got a big scythe as well. So he's a little death.
Oh, I see. Scythe.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Scythe, whatever. All right, in the news, Amazon Music HD has launched, and they're using a familiar video terms to describe the different levels of audio quality because that won't be confusing. SD for standard definition is the label used for lossy audio up to 320 kilobits per second. So it could be much less.
Possibly, yes. It does say up to. Yep.
The HD is being used for lossless CD quality, 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. The bit rate is up to 850 kilobits
So
per
that
second.
has to be some kind of still compression codec.
It's compression.
Because
yeah.
standard CD with zero
what they
compression
compressed was the CD.
is like 1.5 something megabits per second, I think. So yeah, it's got to be like FLAC.
It's halved.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's halved.
Yeah.
It's probably FLAC or something similar.
That sounds most reasonable. But yeah, so far, standard def and high def now being used as audio terms.
And they're all using Ultra HD as a label for lossless audio with bit rates up to 3,730 kilobits per second, and the sampling rates as high as 24-bit, 92 kilohertz. Whatever.
High-res audio. That's what they're calling it.
The price is it's all the same service, all the same price, right? There's no tiers.
Correct. There are no tiers.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of not every song is available in. So they say they'll always give you the highest quality that they have available in terms of what's the song recording and whatever device you're using can support. You will get the highest quality available from Amazon Music HD, which is not part of Amazon Prime Music. This is its own separate service.
Yeah. The price is $15 per month or $20 per month for a family plan, which I assume means that you get multiple streams at the same time. You get a $2 discount if you're an Amazon Prime member. Ooh. And they say they have over 50 million songs in HD and millions of songs in Ultra HD. Well, they should have all of the songs in HD.
One would think, but I guess not.
Well, I mean,
it's not always the case.
They'd have to down convert them or something. I mean, I don't know what they did.
Maybe they never got the originals. Maybe the studio just gave them an MP3 and that's what they've got. Well, that's why it's probably up to 320 kilobits per second. If someone just gave them a 256 and that's all they got, then that's what you get.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and if they're doing podcasts or anything else on there, then our podcast is like 93 or something.
And they say millions with an S of Ultra HD, so they must have at least 2 million
or above 1. I would think that above 1 would probably qualify, but we'll see. Perhaps the most interesting, though, is that Amazon Music HD is the first streaming service to offer albums in Dolby Atmos. They only announced Atmos playback via the new $200 Amazon Echo Studio speaker that will launch November 7th. The Echo Studio has a cylindrical design with one upward firing driver, and you can pair 2 of them together plus a $130 Echo sub, I'm putting in air quotes because it's not, for a proper 2.1.2 setup. Amazon says they'll have several albums available to stream not several million.
Nope, several.
Albums available to stream in Atmos when the Echo Studio launches, and Universal Music already announced several months ago that they're making a catalog of thousands of songs in Atmos, which should all be coming to Amazon Music HD. One of our listeners, Ted asked on Twitter if Atmos streams will be available on any devices other than the Echo Studio. And if you've already got an Atmos home theater, will this be a convenient way to access and stream music in Atmos? So,
So at the moment, unknown. People have asked, Digital Trends in particular said that...
How would you know, though? How would you know?
Out.
Because if you take a 2-channel thing and you have your Atmos up mixer going on.
Well, that's still not the same. I mean, that'll say Dolby Surround. It won't actually say Atmos.
That's true, but do you really think they're remixing all these songs in Atmos?
Actually, yeah, the Atmos ones they are.
Well,
now the thing is, they never said that this is going to be lossless Atmos. I'm assuming it's Dolby Digital Plus, not Dolby True HD Atmos, because that would be a higher bit rate than I think even the Ultra HD stream mentioned supporting. So this could be Dolby Digital Plus Atmos, which means that it actually is lossy. But
I mean, but are they? I mean, they've got to be going full Atmos though, right? Like full 7 point whatever it is.
Well, I mean,
I guess it's 5 point up to 4.
The whole point is that Atmos doesn't have a channel count necessarily if they're using objects, right? It's just that you can place the sounds wherever you please, and your Atmos decoder will do the best it can to put them where the coordinates say to. I mean, that's how a little device like the Echo Studio can supposedly give you some kind of Atmos effect. I mean, you can use just one of them by itself, which gives you like pseudo stereo sound. It only has one tweeter, but it's got woofers firing off in different directions and a single driver firing up. And supposedly that's still playing back the Atmos stream. But as far as other devices supporting the Atmos stream, they haven't said anything yet. Digital Trends mentioned in their own article that they reached out to both Dolby and Amazon and didn't hear back from them yet. However, on Amazon's Music HD page, they have their preferred partners, some of which are the major AV receiver brands, although I didn't see Sony or Yamaha on there, which is kind of surprising. Maybe they'll be added later, but most of the other ones, and if those are like preferred partners, then I'm assuming at some point those AV receivers will have like a Music HD app that you can probably get in a firmware update or something like that. That's what I would hope and think, but nothing known for sure yet.
We've hoped and thought a lot of things that haven't happened.
That is definitely true.
Let's not put too much stock.
But it would
into
seem
any of our hopes
weird
and
to
dreams.
go to the trouble of partnering with Universal and having some of their own music done in Atmos, and then being like the only way you can play it back is through our speaker that doesn't really do Atmos. So one would hope.
Oh no. Sound United, which owns Denon Marantz, Polk, Def Tech, Boston Acoustics, and Class A, has called off their acquisition of Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer. Well, Onkyo and Integra is one company, and then also Pioneer. The deal fell through after closing conditions were not met. So we don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah, well, they're not revealing all details, but they mentioned two things in particular, which was like their due diligence had to be done, and then financing had to be secured, and something along those lines didn't pan out because the deal is no longer happening. So, Onkyo a while back purchased Pioneer. They also merge/bought Gibson guitars, and that deal seemed to have really soured at some point because I don't remember all the details, but I remember seeing that things were not rosy in Gibson/Onkyo land. So I don't know what's going on, but
I don't even understand that merger to begin with. But
at
whatever.
this point, Sound United will not be acquiring Onkyo and Pioneer any longer. So I guess as long as they keep going, that means we still have some competition in the market. But yeah,
I know right now everybody's owned.
Everybody's Sound United, pretty much.
Yeah, except for Yamaha. All right. If you were still using Windows Media Center as either a cable or over-the-air DVR, Microsoft announced they'll no longer be providing guide data as of January 2020. Alternative guide data sources do exist, but it's one more nail in the coffin of Windows Media Center. Don't you have to be running Windows 7 to make that work?
8.1 Pro.
8.1
Pro
basically 7.
Basically 7. That's what most people are doing.
Yeah.
And Windows 7 will no longer be getting any critical security updates as of January 2020. So do these two things go hand in hand? Probably just coincidentally, but nonetheless, Microsoft is like, yep, there's free guide data that we've been providing to Windows Media Center users all this time. That's no longer. It is time to look for an alternative solution, folks who are using Windows Media Center still.
Welcome to Plex.
Pretty much.
Right. Comments. Ian noticed that the Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player is now available in the U.S. from Best Buy at $250.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's good.
Interesting. I haven't the UB450, which is the newer model. I haven't seen hide nor hair of that just yet. But the 420, I want to point out, is a great solution for anyone using a projector who didn't want to pay $500 for the UB820. Because the 420...
Right, that was the question we had last week, wasn't it?
No, because he was looking for one with Dolby Vision. And that is the one thing that the UB420 does not do. The 420 does not do Dolby Vision. It does do HDR10+. So if you're using a Samsung QLED TV, this might be nice to pair with it. But yeah, that is the one thing it doesn't have is Dolby Vision. The 420 does HDR10, HDR10+, and it has the HDR optimizer, which of course is the big feature that you would want. So since there are no projectors doing Dolby Vision anyway, this is like the perfect thing to pair up with a projector because you get the tone mapping, you get the HDR optimizer, and who cares about Dolby Vision because a projector wouldn't use it anyway.
There we go. Mike heard us talking about 20 amp circuits, and he has an important correction. The United States National Electrical Code states that 14 gauge wire, like the standard 14.2 Romex that we mentioned, not Rob,
yes.
But let's go on, is only allowed
podcast.
for 15 amp circuits. Yeah. 20 amp circuits must use 12 gauge. So there you go. That's why I said when we started talking about that, I immediately said, make sure you talk to an electrician and don't just start switching circuits out, because who knows. Furthermore, he says it's fine to use 15 amp outlets with 12 gauge wire, or even connected to a 20 amp breaker, but not the other way around. So yeah, of course, you can have bigger wires with the lower amperage circuit, but not the other way around. Right. So an important correction: he doesn't want to hear about anybody being in violation of code, or of course, much worse, starting a fire. So the people, it's like, I don't know. For me, like having 20 amp circuits for most home theaters, and honestly, even the ones that have the big amplifiers that can use them, it feels a lot like spinning rims on a car. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, you're bragging about it, so and you did go through the trouble and spend some money to get it, but is it really doing anything for you? Like,
well, I mean, we know the vast majority of the time, no amplifier is ever actually going to be, like, the speaker is never going to request the actual entire amount possible. But for a teeny tiny little minute peak for a fraction of a second, at which point the capacitor bank is supplying that power, not the wall outlet.
One at the wall, right.
But nevertheless, I guess if you just want to hook up everything to some test gear and see how far you can push it, then you'll want your 20 amp circuit on, connected to your ATI amplifier or what have you. So make sure it's 12 gauge wire inside the walls. Thank you, Mike, for that correction. That is very, very important. And good info. Happy to be corrected about that.
All right, here we go with the questions. Janan says his media room is coming together, but the current doors leading into the media room are hollow bifold doors with obvious gaps, and sound is easily leaking out. So what is a reasonably priced solution? Would replacing these hollow bifold doors with a single solid core door be enough? Is there such a thing as a special sound isolating door that wouldn't be crazy expensive? The answer to the bottom part is no, because no.
I mean, there are in fact THX certified doors. Such things do exist. They are crazy expensive. So in terms of a specialty door listed as being sound isolating, those are expensive, but it doesn't have to.
Your room is probably using the gap under the door as air exchange anyway.
Likely.
So there's really, like, you're like, okay, well, what if I take and put, weather stripping or something underneath the door to keep the air, whatever. It's just really, your room is going to get super hot or super cold or super something. It's, the air, there's not going to be airflow in there, or not as much.
If the gap under your door is the air return, I mean, it isn't in every room, so that's worth checking.
Yeah, it's not.
But it's typical. It's typical that is how. So you have, your forced air coming in, be it your heating and or cooling that's coming in through the registers, but then that air needs to be able to get out of the room somehow, and typically that's just the gap under the door. That's very common. So if that's the case, you wouldn't want to seal that up. I mean, the not crazy expensive solution to this is just an exterior door, right? You get an exterior door that would go on your basement or your front door or whatever.
Well, so solid core, basically solid.
But
door.
An exterior one would also typically have a pretty good seal around it. Maybe not 100%. Right. Well, if it's a basement one, it might be, a fully sealed door. So that would be the solution that you would get. That wouldn't be a specialty sound isolating door. It would be an exterior door.
I wouldn't expect you to be able to shut that door, and then on the other side of it, you're like, I can hear nothing.
Well, it wouldn't be that, but it would be better than a hollow bifold door with gaps that you can see through even when the door is closed, which is what he was describing. Yeah. So the solution here, if you just went with a standard interior but solid core door, and it still has, a gap underneath it, because you need that if that's how your air circulates back to your furnace through the air return. But that will certainly be less sound leaky than your current hollow bifold door. I mean, again, like Tom is absolutely right. It's not as though it's going to be silent on the other side of the door, but it will be improved over what you have right now. So you sort of have to evaluate how much better do you want the sound isolation to be. If you're just like, I just need it better than it is right now, I understand it won't be dead quiet, then just a standard interior hollow solid core.
I just don't want this guy to have unreasonable expectations for what's going to happen here. I mean, it's not going to be not silent. It's going to be very not silent. It's going to be better, but it's not going to be like, now all I need to do is shove a towel underneath this door and it's silent. It's not going to be.
But I mean, it's the difference of like in my own apartment here, this is just a hollow core door on my bedroom here. But like if I have my bathroom fan going with the bathroom door open and I have this door open, well, I can hear that fan going, no problem. But I close this door and I can't hear that fan anymore. And I mean, it might be that level of difference where it's like if you've got obvious sound going in or out through a hollow bifold door and you go to a regular interior solid core door, it'll be the difference between that, right? It'll knock it down for sure. Yeah.
It should, yes. Sean's wife wants a wireless speaker she can use around the house and occasionally outside on their deck. They're looking to keep the price around $200, and she liked how loud the new IKEA Symphonisk.
Yep, that's what
I'm
what
not
they went
saying
with.
that. It's just made by Sonos. Shelf speaker was able to get, although Sean thought the sound quality was just not bad. So a loud, portable, wireless, good-sounding speaker at around $200 is what they're looking for, and Sean is hoping for both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi options since he doesn't necessarily want to have a phone actually playing the music and just streaming it to the speaker. So what do we recommend? So I can't remember the name of this. What are the speakers I have? Do you remember, Rob? They're the super expensive ones. They're Meridians. I think they're Meridians.
Oh, I don't recall that because I was going to think you have that creative eye roar, but
that one's been gone for a long time.
Okay, I don't recall the current ones, the more expensive ones.
I have some Meridian speakers, and Meridian does Play-Fi.
Okay, DTS Play-Fi.
So what I would be looking for is Play-Fi, because Play-Fi basically it requires that the speaker has the ability to connect via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, almost always. There can be other connections as well, and many of them do, but they almost always have to have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and that allows you to control the speaker from an app on your phone, which you can then connect like your different music streaming services. You don't have to connect it to your phone directly if you don't want to. In fact, I never do. What I do is I figure out what apps I'm going to be using with it. I connect those apps up. And then if somebody comes over and is like, oh, I want to play something for you, then I let them connect via Bluetooth and they stream outside the house. So if you go to the Play-Fi website, they have partners.
Yeah.
One of the Meridian, I believe the speaker. I've got two different ones of these speakers. I can't remember if they're both Play-Fi or not. I know one of them is. They're loud. They sound good. And they're stupid expensive. I don't remember if they're within the $200 range. I know one of them. I know the big one I have is not.
Well, like
the smaller one,
SVS's Prime wireless speakers work with DTS Play-Fi, but they are well above this price point. They're $550. Yeah.
So I went to the Play-Fi website and found Phonos. Now Phonos is a
Forus. Phorus. Forus.
Yeah. Forus. They have Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. They connect. You can stream lossless from your AirPlay. You can stream AAC or the aptX, I think, and everything. So they have all of the connections you might want. They have more than one speaker offering, and one of them is $200. It's the PS5. These are wireless. You can take them to different rooms and stuff. And it's
not
$200.
Battery powered though, right? It's a plug-in.
Is it plug-in? I thought it said wireless, and I just assumed it.
Well, I mean wireless in terms of connection, but I think it still needs to be. I mean, almost all Wi-Fi speakers need to be plugged in. There's very few speakers that connect to Wi-Fi that are battery powered. Now, on a deck is making me think, well, you can probably plug it in on a deck. I mean, you're not talking about taking it to a park, right? You're out on your deck. Even if you have to run an extension cord, you can probably plug it in. So, I mean, the question for me with any Wi-Fi speaker is if it is a Wi-Fi setup, it's going to be using some kind of app, and they're going to have a number of streaming partners. And so sometimes it's about finding the one. I mean, if there's a particular service that you want and DTS Play-Fi, for example, doesn't have them, now or yet, or you don't know if it's coming, then that would be one reason to look at somebody else's service. I mean, I don't know which services Sean and his wife want, but that's just something to be aware of. Make sure that DTS Play-Fi supports the services that you want, and if it does, then that would work. And I'll just mention
support most of them.
It's pretty good, but maybe not everything. So, I mean, there is Hios from Den and Marantz, and they have a speaker that does have an optional battery. So if you need one that is a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth speaker and the ability to use it with a battery, there's an optional battery. That's the Hios 1, their smallest model. However, once you add the battery to it, you're looking at about $400 total, including the battery. So that kind of throws you way over your budget. And right along those same lines, Sonos has their new Move model, which is $400,
Right.
but that is a rugged one with a battery built in that, of course, connects to
Wi-Fi
Sonos.
is really what's screwing this whole thing up, to be honest with you.
A little bit, yeah.
We could do $200 very easily without.
Oh, if you just wanted
Wi-Fi.
a Bluetooth speaker, that's easy. But I mean, this is also, I mean, I'm mentioning the ones that have batteries, so that is what's increasing the price here. But again, you would want to look at the Hio service and you want to look at the Sonos service and make sure that they offer the service that, or streaming services that you want. And then of course there is Yamaha's MusicCast as well. Their MusicCast 20 goes for $220. You'd want to look at the MusicCast service, make sure it has the ones that you want. But the MusicCast 20 does not have an option for a battery. So that's a plug-in one only. So that would be the ones to look at. That covers pretty much all the major Wi-Fi streaming apps that you might consider. So you got a DTS Play-Fi option, MusicCast, Hios, and Sonos options.
And I do want to say, it's often the case that looking for a portable Bluetooth speaker and requesting loud and sounding good usually are kind of mutually exclusive. It becomes very hard. Like the BenQ one, which was just Bluetooth only, sounded great. I mean, it sounded very good, but it's not very loud. And the creative, the iRoar series sounds fine, but I don't know that I would classify it as sounding good.
Right.
But then again, it's the size, it's smaller than the brick, so how good does it, you really expect it to sound? So, but it is loud.
Yep.
It's like stupid loud. So, those are Bluetooth options that you can look at. That would be fantastic, but they are they don't necessarily meet most of your criteria, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, to me, a lot of it is looking at the app, and then at least there are options for a lot of various ones.
I would very quickly get away from worrying about whether or not something sounded good. The thing that you need to drop in this is sounding good.
Well, I mean, none of these are the equivalent of a great pair of speakers. No, none of these are that. But
every single good sounding, whatever portable speaker, it's good for a portable speaker.
Right.
That's not the same thing as good. It maybe sounds a lot better than any other portable speaker you've ever heard, but then again, it's still a single point of origin thing. So the thing I do like about the Play-Fi and the Forest and other a lot of those options, Play-Fi in particular, allows you to take more than one speaker and use them in stereo.
Well,
so then all of a sudden,
all of the ones mentioned do, but of course that doubles your price no matter what you do.
Whatever. Yeah, then we're really in trouble here. But whatever. Mark says, thanks for spending the time to go through his subwoofer measurements 2 weeks ago. He was happy to hear that he actually has pretty good response already, but he is a perfectionist. Sorry, sir.
Yup.
You're about to have
tough row to hoe.
Tough couple of weeks. There you go. Yeah. And he's willing to spend the time, so he's going to follow Rob's 12-set guide to setting up dual subwoofers, as we suggested, and he'll get back to us once his new measurement. He has his measurements from that. But in the meantime, he's just curious as to why we didn't go over waterfall and decay graphs when we were discussing his bass response last week. Did he send us waterfall or decay?
Well, he sent the entire Room EQ Wizard file to me, so I just generated the things to look at.
Oh, okay. He has heard how if you manage to get linear bass frequency response, especially across multiple seats, that it automatically means you've gotten rid of multiple ringing, long decay times. But he doesn't understand how or why. Could we please explain? Well, I mean, it's just on the face of it, if you think about it. I mean, the reason that you're not having flat, because if your speakers are trying to play flat and they're not sounding flat in your room, it's because something's bouncing around the room and creating problems, which are creating dips and humps. So if you've got back to flat, you're that means that in essence you have tamed a lot of those room issues that you've been having. But there's a lot of other stuff going on. One of the reasons I think we don't discuss waterfall graphs and that sort of stuff is very few people have access to them, and even if you did, there's very little you can do about it once you look at it. It just kind of drives you crazy, and it's very confusing and,
Well, I mean,
boring.
it's this only applies in the bass. This only applies below
Right.
the transition frequency of your room. Which, I mean, if you're just working it out in simple terms, the transition frequency is any frequency with a wavelength longer than the shortest dimension of your room.
It's probably 8
which is
feet.
typically 8 feet, which typically means anything from, I mean, for certain, 125 hertz and lower. And because we don't hear single, one cycle of a wave, we almost always double that and say the transition frequency of your room is twice that frequency. So typically about 250 hertz. And that basically means we are never able to perceive a sound below about 250 hertz in a typical room that hasn't reflected off of some surface before we actually hear it. And so that's where that part of it comes from. Now, once you get to frequencies that are inseparable from the room in which they're being played, you're never hearing a sound that wasn't reflected. Now you're into something that is called minimum phase, which, if you want to look that up and fully comprehend it, you are better than me, because I don't fully comprehend exactly what it means. But the important aspect of minimum phase when it comes to audio is that the time and the frequency response become inseparable. You fix one, you automatically fix the other, which is why companies that do nothing but sell gigantic bass traps say you don't need multiple subwoofers. Just, bring in all the walls of your room by about, 3 feet with our bass trapping, and you can fix this. And they're right. It's just largely impractical to shrink the effective size of your room in order to treat your bass that way. But they are correct that if you were to fix all of the reflection issues in the room, you would automatically wind up with linear frequency response.
Yeah, that 3 feet includes the floor too.
Yeah,
by the
and
way.
the ceiling. Yeah, all of it. All of it.
So now your
make an anechoic chamber.
Your 8-foot ceiling has gone from 8 feet to
2.
3 feet at the bottom, 3 feet at the top. Subtract it from 8, and you get 2 feet to lie down on in the center of this
room now. So that's why we tend to consider that impractical. And as crazy as some people think having 2 or 4 subwoofers is, it's still more practical than that. So that's what we do. And then once we achieve the linear frequency response by using multiple subwoofers, it has in turn automatically fixed the time issues, but only in the bass, only below the transition frequency of the room. So when we talk about looking at waterfall graphs, because sometimes people have asked, what will my acoustic treatments do? Well, the acoustic treatments that we're usually talking about on this podcast are like 2, 4, maybe 6 inches thick. At most, they're treating down to 180 hertz if we're lucky. Right. So we're mostly talking about above the actual transition frequency of the room. And we're looking to see that we don't have weird decay times in our mid-range and treble. That's what we're trying to address with our first reflection points and other acoustic treatments in the room, to make sure that we don't have, certain frequencies in the mid-range and treble that are ringing much longer than others. We want to treat that with normal acoustic panels. But in the bass, it's this minimum phase thing where you fix one and you've automatically fixed the other.
Right. It's one of those things that the mathematicians will sit down and show you how it works, and then you'll go afterwards.
I don't fully comprehend the full equations on that one, so I can't explain it to you in that much detail.
I had a statistics teacher one time describe to me how his instructor, his mentor, was sitting down and they were looking at some data. And as he was looking at the data, he goes, oh, maybe we can look at it this way. Maybe we can look this way. And as he was writing it all out and kind of figuring it out in his head, he had just sort of reinvented a regression.
Right.
Doing a regression analysis on the data. And he's like, the guy's brain doesn't even work like mine does. And I'm like, yeah, and I don't understand half the crap you're saying. So, I'm so far below you people. So, I understand. Via trial and error, he actually has his front, left, right SVS prime speakers set to 150 hertz crossover. All by themselves, they can play quite nicely down to 50 hertz or so. So he started with an 80 hertz crossover, as we always recommend. But when he measured the response of his dual subs plus his front, left, and right speakers with the crossover set to 80, he got a huge dip, an obvious null right around the 80 to 90 hertz. So he increased the crossover frequency until that huge null went away, and then he wound up at 150, which is very high. As he's said previously, the bass in this room actually sounds good to his ears, but it still seems odd to him that Odyssey Multi-Q XT32 and using a typical 80 hertz crossover would result in such an obvious problem. Will following Rob's 12-step guide make it so he can use an 80 hertz crossover? This is one of the reasons why you don't want to mess with this stuff once you get a good flat response. Just like,
well, I mean,
don't ask questions.
He kind of did, though. I mean, he placed the subwoofers as we would recommend. Then he ran Multi-Q XT32 with sub EQ HT. I don't know what it initially set his front, left, right speakers to. Probably large or a lower crossover. As he says, just listening to them out in a field, they can play down to 50 hertz, but that's not how they respond in the room. So I didn't go into a lot of detail about setting your crossover. That would be a whole other guide and actually more complicated than just getting the subs to play nicely with each other. So I haven't done that. But yours is the perfect candidate for the polarity switch. Because if just setting it to the 80 hertz crossover and the subs as they were resulted in an obvious, measurable, and audible null, just flipping the polarity to 180 ought to address that. Because what it means
in the subs or in the
subs or in the receiver if it allows it, right? Some receivers have a polarity switch, or in the subs themselves it'll be a polarity, or literally just flipping the phase on the subs 180 degrees from whatever they are. So if you go through the full 12-step guide that I've mentioned and you wound up having adjusted the phase knob on one of the subs, I mean, you said you were willing to spend the time, so that should get you as uniform bass as you're able to get from your two subs positioned as they are at your seat. You'll go back, you'll measure that again in Room EQ Wizard and see how good that uniformity is. You'll run Odyssey once again, but this time with it set only to one subwoofer output, not dual independent. And you will wind up with the frequency response being as linear as you're able to get it, particularly in the primary seat, and then if it's uniform in the other two seats, pretty linear there too. Then you'll have to double check what happens with your subwoofer to speaker crossover once again. And if you discover that setting it to 80, where we would still recommend, you still have an actual outright null at 80, what you would want to do is go to both of your subs and change their phase knobs by 180 degrees, because the SVSs don't have just a polarity switch on them. So that's the way you would address that, and it should work. That's exactly what the polarity switch is for.
Good luck. We'll see you in a month or two. Nathan, have we heard anything about Denon's Helios lineup getting a refresh soon? Nathan is thinking about things like AirPlay 2, Dolby's new Atmos virtualization that Amazon's newest Echo products are offering, and maybe even WiSA capabilities, or at least the ability to use Helios speakers as wireless surrounds and with Denon and Marantz receivers, none of which are available with our current Helios lineup. So are they going to keep up or rapidly fall behind? Dude, they have already rapidly fell behind. They had never caught up with this Helios thing. This Helios thing is the biggest afterthought that Denon's probably ever come up with.
I don't know about but
I mean, come on.
They haven't been
There's
the leader,
no
that's for
excuse.
sure. They've never been the leader.
Musicast is light years ahead of them as far as I'm
concerned. And even
they're
in some ways behind where Sonos is at this point.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But Sonos does nothing but this. Sonos better be in front.
And then Sonos doesn't work with any traditional AV receivers, so that's where Musicast is still our sort of pick. We have been saying
for 5 years that they should have that your receiver should be able to send a wireless signal to a surround speaker.
Yamaha finally did it this year with Musicast. It took until now. Yeah. And only one pair.
I would not expect Helios to make any big advancements this year.
Well, not with the remainder of 2019. To answer, I haven't heard anything about a refresh, but then I'm never privy to the newest news. When it comes out, I usually see it within the first few days of the announcement because I'm monitoring such things, but I have no advanced warning of any such things. But if anything, I mean, I know it's a little bit glib to say, but I honestly think simply because of AirPlay 2 that's the thing that might get them to do some kind of lineup refresh, because Apple just tends to have that kind of pull. I mean, look at how many AV receivers, quickly came up with AirPlay when that first came out. It was a big deal.
It was the selling point for every receiver that year.
It really was.
There's no doubt about that.
I wouldn't expect to see WiSA.
No.
In fact, I mean, Klipsch was all over WiSA for about 2 months, and now it seems to not really be very prevalent on their website anymore. So
and there's
I wouldn't
nothing.
expect that part.
I've heard WISA. It's a good solution, and from what I understand from installers and stuff, it works well. But it just doesn't have any.
It doesn't seem to be able to get traction. I mean, they built it into this year's LG TVs, and they have not marketed it at all.
That doesn't help for sure. They should be selling TVs with surround back speakers.
Yeah,
they should be.
But so I mean that feature I wouldn't expect, Nathan. I'd be surprised if that were in there. Dolby Atmos support, like what's just been done with the Echo Studio. I don't know. I mean, Denon is one of their preferred partners over at Amazon, so maybe they're working on something along those lines.
2020 at the earliest,
right?
And I see AirPlay 2 coming for sure.
Yep.
I don't necessarily see them integrating almost anything else, to be honest with you. I would not be surprised, and I could be completely wrong, and I'm okay with that. I would be surprised if by 2021 CEDIA we saw Helios supporting surround back speakers.
I mean, they have an actual Helios branded AV receiver, which is 5.1 only, and just the 2 surround speakers work with Helios speakers, but it's a specialized AV receiver. It's not something that they've built into Denon and Marantz receivers. I am a little surprised they haven't done it. I would expect to see that at some point, because there's no reason that couldn't work with the current Helios speakers. You don't even need new Helios speakers to do that. So I'm a little surprised they haven't done that. That I would kind of expect to see at some point.
It just doesn't make any sense why they can't just route any channel they want to Helios. Or Musiccast was this. I mean, I feel the same way about Musiccast. The fact that only came out this year is bizarre.
Yeah.
That should have been like, first and foremost, we're gonna be able to stream music around the house. Why don't we stream music around the room? I mean, why wasn't that like feature number 2 that they came out with?
Who knows? In any case,
Musiccast has been here for a long time. I mean, Musiccast has been 10 years?
I'm not sure, but it's been around a while.
It's been around for a while, and just this year they came out with, by the way, we can support surround speakers. Oh, thanks, guys. Way to hit that one.
So I don't know, Nathan, but the AirPlay 2 of all things actually makes me suspect there might be a lineup refresh in the not too distant future.
Ben is constructing his dedicated 12 by 16 by 8 foot theater with 3 feet of material all around.
Nope, that's not the plan.
It's going to be the man cave. You'll actually have to crawl in it. It's going to be like The Descent.
Yep,
it's going to feel very claustrophobic. And there will be monsters in there. Ben is constructing this dedicated 12 by 16 by 8 theater, and he asked for in-wall speaker recommendations since he doesn't have a lot of free space to work with. But now, after our response, he's considering on-wall speakers instead. He likes how super flat the KEF T101 speakers are. Super flat, super shiny, right? Those like the silver ones?
No, they're just like a flat white or a flat black.
Okay, I'm thinking of a different one. He thinks they would make excellent surround speakers. Okay, but he isn't sure he'll think they're good enough to be his front 3. For those who's considering the RBH Signature Series on walls, would RBH and KEF T Series be a good match? Well, RBH is going to be fine. I don't know those KEFs or how flat they tend to play. That would be my only concern. I would look at a frequency response graph from somebody before I made that.
Frequency response graph doesn't really tell the whole story, because there's nothing offensive about the response of the KEFs, and the RBHs are pretty ruler flat.
How RBHs are going to be, but how far down do they play, the KEFs?
Oh, they're okay. They the regular T series, they get down to right around 80 hertz. I mean, I would probably call it 100. Because the 80 hertz spec is maybe a little bit optimistic. They do say that's only if they're mounted on the wall, which means the speaker itself not really playing that low. Out on a stand, they're like 100 or 120. But on the wall with 100 hertz crossover works pretty darn well with any of the KEF T series speakers. So I mean, as your surrounds, they would absolutely be what I would have no problem calling fine. But if you're a very critical, really want that perfect timbre match type of sound going through all your channels, I mean, I always say the KEF T series is shocking. There's no reason a speaker that skinny should be able to sound even remotely decent, and they do. But I wouldn't call them the equal of RBH's Signature series. That's a stretch. So it's tough because I would call them completely inoffensive. I would say they're fine, but if you're looking for much better than fine.
Oh, okay. I know. I just looked up the
Yeah.
speakers. I was thinking of different speakers. I was thinking of the silver ones. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the price points of these are going to be vastly different as well. So the Signature series.
Oh, the Signature
is,
series, yes, much more expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, these are very, very thin, and they're like what, $600 a pair? Is that right? Somewhere around there.
The smaller ones, the 101s, the smaller version, they go for about $300 each, and they're not even an inch and a half from front to back. They're 1.4 inches from front to back, so they are as skinny as an on-wall speaker can get. Do love that form factor, but yeah, about $600 for the pair for the KEF T101s. But then you're looking at what about $2,600 for a pair of the RBH Signature on walls? Yeah.
I'll put it to you this way. This is the way I put it. When you look at a price difference that great, these will sound more similar than they should.
Yep, I would agree with that. Yep.
That's I'm not going to say they're going to be a good match.
Right.
Because there's no way those KEFs are going to keep up with those RBHs.
Yeah, like you wouldn't want to use a KEF T-Series center with a pair of RBH Signature left and right. That is not a timbre match across your front three, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as surround speakers,
yeah,
probably okay, though for $300, I kind of feel like, I don't know, that's a lot of money to spend on an itty bitty speaker that's not going to keep up with your front speakers.
Let's go to the next question because this might address everything in one fell swoop.
So are there any super flat on-walls that would be better surround speaker match for RBH Signature Series on-wall fronts? Or alternatively, are there any on-walls that would make for excellent front speakers that would actually work really well with the KEF T101 surrounds? Well, I mean, if you're going to buy RBHs up front,
yes,
kind of seems to make sense to buy RBHs for the surrounds.
That's just
and
it.
They have offerings all over the place and, at different price points, but RBHs are always going to play nice with other RBHs, even if they can't quite hit the extension that the other, or they get as loud as the other ones can. But they are going to sound more similar than the KEFs will sound to.
That's right, because RBH has a model called the Ultra One. Now, we talked about how the KEF T-Series is 1.4 inches from front to back. Well, the Ultra One is 1.625 inches. All right. So it is a teeny bit thicker from front to back, but I would still...
0.225.
That's right. That is still a very, very thin speaker. Now, they are priced at $400 each. So that is more expensive than the T101s, but still not too crazy and definitely skinny. And it is RBH. It's going to, as surrounds matching up with our other RBH on walls up front, that would work just fine. So that is the let's increase the price solution.
I just found new, I don't know if this is an authorized retailer.
Most likely
but I just
not
found,
if it's online.
Yeah, online, $245.70 a pop.
That's probably what New Audio Video, who are not an authorized retailer.
Yep, yeah. Not authorized.
They're specifically called out on RBH's website as not an authorized seller. So, but in any case, the let's go cheaper solution would be, of course, just to get the larger T-Series speakers as your front three, right? There's the T301s. Those are $400 each, so they're actually the exact same price as RBH's Ultra ones, but they're a little bit physically larger, can play louder than the 101s for sure. So that would be the option to lower the price versus RBH Signature Series, but I wouldn't call any of the KEF T-Series, including the larger 301s, the equal of the RBH Signature Series. So if those are the speakers you want up front, are the RBH Signature Series, maybe you spend $100 more per speaker, $200 more total to get the RBH Ultra One Super Slim on-walls as your surrounds. That's probably the way to go. I did just want to mention while we're on the topic of on-wall speakers, I hadn't kept up with KEF's current lineup, and KEF's got Reference Premier Series on walls right now.
You mean Clips?
Yeah. What was I saying? KEF?
KEF.
Klipsch. I'm sorry. They both start with K. I'll give myself that out. No, Klipsch. They've got Reference Premier series on-wall speakers now that I really like the looks of those. That's this is one of those cases where occasionally we're looking for on-wall speakers that are very efficient and can play very loud. So that's where Klipsch always excels. Is the larger ones, the RP 240Ds. They're only $300 each, so right in this same ballpark. They're 94 dB efficient with 300 watt power handling. I'm like, that is an on-wall speaker that can play loud for not costing an arm and a leg. So it's just something.
They look like they're quite a bit thicker than the
oh
other
yes,
ones,
yeah.
though.
I'm not mentioning these in particular for this solution with Ben, but I want anybody who's listening to this topic and thinking about on-wall speakers, I want to throw that out because we had that one fellow who was getting his new place and he was looking for in walls and it was like an exterior wall in a large open space, and I was like, I don't know of a not too expensive on wall that can play super loud. I was looking for that. I'm like, oh, here we go. Klipsch reference Premier on walls, not crazy expensive and can play super loud, and they're on wall instead. So just something to keep in mind.
1-inch titanium dome tweeter
in a horn.
In a horn,
but in the reference Premier horn, which is the one I like the best.
I like the big one's got 3 woofers on top, 3 woofers on the bottom. It's ridiculous.
Well, that one's $500 each. And actually, it's 2 active woofers above and below and then 4 passive radiators. So I don't really see a huge amount of benefit to that one. I like the RP240D.
It looks like they're trying to make that so that it actually lines up with the sides of your
It's an aesthetic
TV or
thing more
like
than
that.
anything, yeah.
Yeah, I think this, yeah. Anyways, all right, so Klipsch just got an option. You know what? I have such a love-hate relationship with their golden domes, their golden things. I just
the cerametallic woofers, as they call them.
Kind of like it. It's definitely iconic. Like I look at that and I think Klipsch.
Yes,
but I kind of also hate it. I don't know.
Put the grills on.
So, anyways, so how much space does there need to be between the fronts of the speakers and the back of an acoustically transparent screen? Enough so that the woofer doesn't touch it.
Well, with any of the woven acoustically transparent screens, which is pretty much all we ever recommend are woven options, they always recommend 2 inches minimum. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. And we recommended he go with dual SVS SB2 2000 subs. I don't know why I almost said $2,000, but those will. But will those give him flat frequency response down to 20 hertz? Is there a way to calculate how much room gain you'll get? Yes, it will give you flat to 20 hertz.
Yes, it will.
I mean, that's just what they do.
Out in a wide open field, they're minus 3 dB at 19 hertz, so they will be just fine.
Yeah, so we know that will happen. That's just what they do. But room gain is what? If you stick it in the corner, it's going to be 6 to 9 dB. Is that right?
Yeah, typically 9. Again, we get into that whole transition frequency thing. So if you happen to have a room that's 60 feet long, but then normal dimensions wide and high, you might only get 6 dB of room gain in a corner. But for normal rooms, I mean, especially in a room like this size that we're talking about, 12 by 16 by 8, pretty much all frequencies will be getting room gain if you were to put it in a corner. So that'd be +9. If you got it away from the corner, you'd be closer to +6.
Right.
So yeah, you'll be getting somewhere in the range of 6 to 9. But down at the deep frequencies like 20 hertz, 55 feet long, certainly longer than any of the dimensions of your room. If you put it in a corner, you'll get 9 decibels more output.
And that's not per sub. That's together.
Yeah. Actively together.
Remember, that's together. Kevin was using a Denon 4520 Ci receiver to drive 9 speakers, a 9-speaker setup in his theater. It stopped working, and an authorized Denon repair center told him the DSP chipset was no longer functioning, and unfortunately, the parts are no longer available, so his 4520 can't be fixed. Its amplifiers still work, and since the 7.1 analog input completely bypasses stealth digital processing, Kevin was thinking he could just use it as a dumb amplifier. With his Denon out of commission, he moved to a Pioneer Elite SC65 that he had been using in a different room, so he moved that into his theater. He's using an Emotiva XPA3 amp to power his front 3 speakers, so his receiver is powering 6 speakers by itself. He's using 8 ohm rated speakers, except for his surround backs, which are 4 ohms. He's about 14 feet away from all of his speakers. The room is about 3,750 cubic feet and heavily treated. Mm-hmm. The Denon had been fine, but this Pioneer quickly started having problems going into thermal protection mode and shutting down 3 times over the weekend as he was watching Blu-rays, and he wasn't even at full reference volume. All of his gear is in a separate room, and he says the receiver is positioned at the top of his equipment stack. So he has a 200 millimeter fan, above the receiver, so he believes his ventilation should be fine. Is there an Xbox 360 below it? Because that's cooked. Because that's
It
cooking
is
it.
drawing the air in from the bottom, so all the hot air from below it is being drawn into the bottom of the receiver.
Yeah, I always put my receivers as low as I can.
Let it ventilate its heat to everybody else.
Let it cook the stuff above it. That Blu-ray player isn't exactly generating a lot of heat.
True.
He looked up at the Pioneer specs and saw that while it's rated at 130 watts per channel times 9, they only list the wattage going into 1 kilohertz. Yes, they do.
Mm-hmm.
So he has convinced himself that the Pioneer is just weak.
Well, so I mean, I want to address all of that before we actually get into his questions, because
that's fine.
I don't think this is just a case of I'm playing my system. It's not even powering the front 3 speakers, which by far get the most signal content, and it's going into protection mode. You've got a stray wire somewhere.
Well, there's so many things that could be happening.
But that's by far the most likely. I mean, we know he moved something. He replaced it and had to reconnect all his wires. Kevin, the chances that these Class D amplifiers in your Pioneer Elite receiver are just unable to drive your surround and surround back speakers to the level that you want.
Even at 4 ohm at 14 feet, which I don't believe your back speakers are 14 feet.
Well, it might, because his room's like 30 feet long, so definitely.
Oh, is it really? So he's sitting dead center?
Well,
okay, so, yeah. I mean, yes, that is asking for a lot, but your surround back speakers aren't exactly doing a lot. So I would have a hard time believing the most likely culprit is going to be a stray wire.
Yes. I mean, we're talking about one tiny little hair-sized thread of a wire that managed to not be perfectly slotted into your banana plug, or if you're using bare wire connection in the back. Like, that's all it takes. You get that tiny little short, which, by the way...
As your receiver, or all the air around it and the wire itself starts to heat up, that wire starts to bend.
It just bends enough to just touch and create an arc. It doesn't even have to physically touch, just get close enough to make that electrical arc. That's all it takes. And you're saying, well, the system is playing and then it shuts down, so it can't just be that there's a short all the time. Yeah, exactly. There's one tiny little loose thread somewhere of copper wire, and as it heats up, it just bends just enough. I
used to have this problem with one speaker just starting to squeal for no reason. This was way back in Jacksonville. Just started squealing for no reason, and then my receiver would go into protection mode, and I'm like, what? So I went and checked all the wires. They all looked fine. Still let's have the problem. Terminated the wires, and it went away.
Yep.
So even though I couldn't see it, there was clearly something happening there.
That's right.
There's something laying across it or something. I don't know.
If you're talking one strand of a speaker, that can, you're not going to, especially if it's like, in an equipment rack where you don't have the greatest lighting in the world. Yeah. Easy to miss if you're just visually looking. So I am convinced, I know you want to say that you just, this Pioneer isn't as good, but no, there's no way that it's actually just unable to drive your surround and surround back speakers. That is not what's going on here, Kevin.
And it's very easy for people, especially on forums, to get down on Class D amplification, or
whatever they decide they want to be,
whatever they decide they don't like, and try to get you to buy something new and better, because they know that if you buy something new and better, you're going to be more ecstatic than you would be if it's just fix a wire. So I don't know how it happened on this website, but I went to some website that was supposed to track like your podcast stats, and I ended up seeing some reviews for our podcast, which they were all very positive except for one. The one star one was like, "What's wrong with these guys? All they want you to do is not spend money." Haven't you ever heard of you get what you pay for? They're always recommending the cheapest stuff.
That's really not true. I've had enough people tell me everything you talk about is too expensive for me, which I completely understand, because this is not cheap stuff.
It's not. I mean, it's just all disposable income for sure.
We throw around $500 subs like they're candy. That's not cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a solution that's going to take time and effort, and in your case a lot more than normal, because we don't know where it's coming,
and it can be on this it can be on the speaker side too, even though we wouldn't expect it in this case. It could be that you just never showed up until after you switched, but
take every single wire out. I would, re-terminate it or wrap the whole thing in electrical tape just in case, and then throw it, or shrink wrap if you've got that, and then throw it, put it back in there, do every single wire, and then
Yep. Because it's not just that
hope it's not the speaker side.
It's not just that these amps aren't powerful. It's a Pioneer Elite too. It's not some entry level dinky thing.
Yeah. So he asks, do I have to read all this now? Are the digital amplifiers using the Pioneer receivers known for being underpowered?
No.
Nope.
In fact, they're highly efficient. So
could it be his one pair of 4 ohm speakers in the back? Probably not. Are the Pioneer digital amps known for having problems with low impedance speakers? Not. 4 ohms is not that low.
If it has unusually low impedance in the high treble, they have a known issue with not being able to power that linearly. Not that they can't power it, but that they have difficulty powering it linearly if you have unusually low impedance in the very high treble. But that is not what we're talking about here at all. So no, it's not that, Kevin.
He's got magnepans in the back. Can I tell you that?
That would be a strange use of magnepan speakers. Your only planar magnetic speakers are your surround backs.
For those who don't know, that magnepans are like thousands of dollars and big electric static panels, and it would be ridiculous to put them in the back. Since Pioneer amplifier specs are only listed at 1 kilohertz, is there a simple equation for translating that into the wattage per channel that would be per channel would be the way most other manufacturers list their specs or whatever? So 8 ohms in 2020. I mean, there's not really. I mean, you could kind of sort of estimate based on previous things, or you could look at somebody else who's actually tested it into those. And there should be somebody out there who has already done that. But there's, you can't just look at a 1K spec and say, oh, well, if it's 130 watts into 1K, it's probably right. I mean, that's about
especially since unfortunately Pioneer doesn't list all the other parameters. The kind of the only thing they mention is the 1 kilohertz thing. Now, if they're like just about every other AV receiver manufacturer, most of whom will list not just the 8 ohms, 20 to 20 with some low amount of total harmonic distortion into 2 channels. That's what most others use. Most others also list into 6 ohms, 1 kilohertz only with 1 or sometimes crazily 10% total harmonic distortion, which is kind of a, you can think of it like a peak figure. So if that's kind of what Pioneer is giving you, is something akin to everyone else's sort of peak figure, and I don't know that it is because they don't list all the other parameters, but if it is along those lines, it's going to be somewhere in the range of 1/2 to 3/4 of the listed wattage. It's going to be somewhere in the range of like 75 to 100 watts. That's a really loose thing to just go by. It's not an equation I can give because, again, we don't know all the parameters.
It really doesn't matter because you're almost never asking for that. I mean, the wattage is just ridiculous to even... I mean, we list it because people care about it, but it's...
But the point really is your surround speakers, even from 14 feet away, there's no reason it can't power those. No reason at all.
Yeah. So since he has his Denon on hand and his Pioneer was shutting down, do we agree with his idea to use his Denon as an amplifier? Are there any tips or considerations for setting things up with his Pioneer just as a pre-pro? Is Emotiva powering the front 3 and is Denon powering the other 6 speakers? Well, strangely enough, if it's not your front 3, which I doubt it would be your front 3 since your Emotiva was probably already in the mix beforehand.
Yeah, probably didn't change that.
It's probably one of your surround backs or Atmos or whatever other speakers you've got going on in there. This would probably fix your problem
simply because you're rewiring.
You're rewiring, right? So you'd be like, I was right. I should use the Denon and the Pioneer sucks. No, but it would be a correlation, not a causation.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's just looking for some way to continue using his Denon without feeling like he's just lost all that money because can't be repaired, at least not easily at this point. And he's like,
4520 is not the most recent receiver, though. I mean, it's been
but it was a nice, not inexpensive receiver. Yeah. So he's like, if I can still use it as just an amplifier, is this, I'm kind of sensing that, he wants a good justification. Oh, the Pioneer's not getting the job done. I can throw my Denon in there and the amplifiers will be better. And it's like, well, I mean, as Tom says, you'll likely fix the problem just because you rewired again. But if you just were to rewire your Pioneer, you'd probably also fix the problem. So I can't
don't you have a zone 2, a zone 3? You want some whole house audio someplace, something like that. This receiver can come in handy later on as well.
Or you sell it for
but
parts.
What you would want to do is sell it for parts. What you want to do is you would just use the pre-outs the same way you normally use the pre-outs on your Emotiva, except your Emotiva doesn't have a volume control.
That's right.
Right? I mean, it shouldn't. Some older Emotivas did, but I'm sure yours doesn't. So what you would do on your Denon is take your volume and turn it up to 0.
Turn it up to 0 dB, then never, ever touch it again. And then run your auto setup, your MCACC on your Pioneer, and allow it to set the trim level because now it's being fed through the Denon acting as the amplifier. So nothing more complicated than that. Just regular RCA connections because it's just going to the 7.1 analog input on the Denon. If you do that, I mean...
It doesn't really matter which ones he plugs it into, right?
As long as you keep
he'd have
track.
to go to the front.
Yeah,
you just keep track of which one's going to what. But I mean, and you can do this. You can do this if you're going to be rewiring anyways.
If the problem,
you can rewire.
If the problem is if it actually is the heat inside of this separate room where he's got his gear stacked, adding another device, churning out power isn't going to help you on that front. So that would be the downside of doing it. It takes up more space and uses even more power and generates even more heat. But honestly, you can do this with just your Pioneer and Emotiva. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wait. This is the last one, right? I didn't scroll. With all of his gear in a separate room, he doesn't particularly want to use IR to power both the Denon and the Pioneer on and off. He wants to have a control method that will allow him that will let him be certain that both devices have powered on and off together, and he doesn't want to have to visually check every time. Could he use the available RS-232 port somehow? His other idea was to hook up a little light to the 12-volt trigger output so that he could have a visual indicator that he could easily see from his seat. What do we think?
Well, if you don't add the Denon to your system, then you're done because you'll know if the Pioneer is on.
But if you really wanted to, then there are like slave outlets on APCs. Right. You could do it that way. That would be a way that you would absolutely, for sure, not have to look at it, not have to have a little light,
cutting the actual electrical power.
Yeah, you would be cutting the power from the Denon completely whenever you turned off the
with a master-slave power switch. I didn't think of that. That's a good solution. Yeah.
That's the way I would do it.
I mean, the RS-232 thing, I mean, it can, but that has to be connected to some kind of home automation controller. Yeah. Or, I mean, you can do things with like a Raspberry Pi or something like that to that. But that's unnecessary with this. I mean, I would still just use a Harmony and feel pretty darn confident if I'm using a Harmony hub that it's gonna work. I mean, ultimately that is infrared, but that's going to work. I wouldn't be concerned about that, like the command missing and not getting through, because if it misses one, it's missing all of them. So a Harmony hub, or I like Tom's master slave power idea.
Carl's room is 11.5 feet wide, and overall it is 16 feet long, although the walls are cut in on both sides about 13 feet back. So the very back of the room is narrower than the front. The ceiling is 8 feet high, but all of the wall-to-ceiling edges are beveled, so right in the corners.
Yeah,
it's beveled.
So it's slightly tented shape. I mean, not very much. But you could think of it as like super chunky crown molding. It's kind of got that look.
Yeah, it's like a 1.5 crown molding, except
it's not crown molding,
bland.
But if you imagine in crown molding that got enlarged to a somewhat ridiculous degree. But yeah, the overall shape of the room, fairly rectangular, just a little narrower at the back is all.
So the room is fully carpeted, and he bought 10 GIC panels off an AVS forum member who was moving, so we got a great deal. 4 242 panels, which are 2 inches thick. 4 244 bass traps, which are 4 inches thick, and 2 monster bass traps, which are 6 inches thick. All 10 of the panels are 2x2, not the larger 2x4
2
size.
Feet by 2
so
feet.
they're 2 feet by 2 feet.
By 2 inches thick, 4 inches thick, 6 inches thick, respectively.
Right. Carl has drawn up his preliminary plan for where he would place these panels, but he also has some Owens Corning 703 installation that he could use to make some DIY panels or super chunks. So, what do we think of his initial plans? Where do we recommend putting his GIC panels and any DIY panels that he makes? So what he has right now is the 4-inch panels straddling the front corners of his room. His 6-inch panels doing the back corners sort of before, but where the cutout is.
The inner or the so he's got like 6 corners if you think about this room, because the back of the room narrows and goes in. So in the rear corners closest to his seat, he's got the monster bass traps straddling those corners.
Yeah. And then he's got the 2-inch panels. He's got them at the first reflection points and on the back wall inside the cutout.
So I mean, overall, I have very little problem with this.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's also got two more 4-inch panels that are kind of in front of.
Well, also on the side walls.
Of his
So I mean, initially my thought would be I would kind of just swap the 2-inch panels that he's got on his very back wall for the 4-inch panels that he's put on his side walls. I just have 2-inch panels on the side walls.
Yeah.
All the way, two 2-inch panels on each side wall, and then I'd probably put the 4-inch panels on the actual back wall. That's a pretty easy swap. I don't think that'll ruin his plans in any way. Otherwise, I think that's a pretty reasonable plan. But do keep in mind these are only 2-foot by 2-foot panels, right? Not taller 2-foot by 4-foot panels. Yeah.
So the monster traps, the 6-inch panels that are straddling the back corners, they're not going floor to ceiling. They're only going in a little.
And when it comes to the bass traps that are straddling any corners, those, well, he asks about, this is coming up, I'm spoiling it a little bit, he asks about ear height, but the ones that are straddling the corners don't need to be ear height. Straddling the corners is all about simply covering as much surface area as you can and getting the benefit of a larger air gap behind the panel. So those you could have up high or down low. They'll actually be...
If you could actually put them so that they're straddling the floor or the ceiling as well, because that gives you another whole area that's being encompassed, another reflection point in there. So rather than the midpoint of the wall, which would only give you 2 walls, you would, if you put it up high, you get 2 walls and the ceiling, or down low, 2 walls and the floor, which gives you another reflection point. So that's the same with the panels up front too. He's assuming that the panels should be placed at seated ear height. Should any panels be placed higher? Well, just the ones that are straddling the corners. And
the ones on your side wall and back wall, those should be at seated ear height, yes.
Yeah. Should he put any panels on his ceiling? I mean, you can. You've got more insulation.
Now, the thing is, he appears to be using a makeshift upward-firing Atmos speaker at the moment. Yep, if you go up to the actual photo of the room... He's got, I believe that's one of those Polk OMW3 speakers that he is angling to use up. No, I don't know if he's planning to replace that with an actual upward firing module or if that's just a temporary thing or whatever. But if you are using an upward firing speaker, well, you certainly don't want to put a panel at your ceiling's first reflection point, because that would negate your upward firing speaker, although I suspect that it would probably still work just because of the EQ. But nevertheless, if any sound is in fact bouncing off of your ceiling, you most definitely wouldn't want to have an absorption panel.
I wish we had definitive proof about this, because we both suspect that it's all about the DSP and has nothing to do with bouncing off of your ceiling. And yet we can't definitively say,
right, because there's things like Yamaha's sound projectors that they legitimately do bounce the sound off of the surfaces.
I mean, they do. I mean, from everything that they've explained, they're supposed to. So I mean, basically, when you're thinking about putting panels around your room, you've already got them in all the spots that we would recommend. So could you put some on your ceiling? Yes. Does it have to be in a specific spot? Probably no. At this point, it's just any absorption more that you can put
with
would be
full
fine.
Carpeting and the amount of treatment he's planning on putting in here, I'm not expecting him to be super shy of that 30% of your surfaces covered mark. So the chances that you need,
especially when we answer the next
chance
question.
that you need something on your ceiling is pretty low in my mind. In this case,
I would not worry.
Agreed.
About it. I'd be honest. I would not worry about it. So he asks, if he makes super chunks, which corners should they go in? Well, man, you've got so many good options here. You've got 3 good options that I can see.
You got 6 corners.
At least.
One of them's taken up with a subwoofer, so probably not that one. One of them is where the door swings open, so maybe not there.
I mean, you could. It looks like if you're going to put that panel there, I bet the super chunk is actually going to be smaller than that panel as it straddles. So you might be better off putting a super chunk right behind that door, to be honest with you. But the front two corners and that corner at the behind the door, to me, look like prime candidates for.
I mean, I
super
was also
chunks.
thinking the
And
actual farthest back corners. Because I don't know if he has anything in the back part of that room, and he's just drawn a diagram. It looks like it's empty back there in the diagram, and if that's the case, yeah, those rear corners, fill them up.
That's 5. That's 5 corners. That's a lot of corners.
That is a lot of corners.
And then those, you got nothing to do with those monster traps.
Yeah.
And
put those on your actual back wall. Yeah. More thicker panels on the back makes sense to me. Having thicker panels on your back wall makes the most sense to me. Yeah,
that's what I said. Put them back there. But but they're only 2 feet.
That's
by
right.
2 feet. So you have those and those other 4-inch ones back there as well. I mean, they would look a little weird, but put one high, one low, that sort of thing. But make sure the 6-inch one is at ear level. Put both those back there, or the ones that are. You could actually, put those up front anyway. It doesn't make any difference. All right, so at the moment he's got his sub to the left and behind the seats. He found that location by doing a subwoofer crawl, and it's working nicely at the moment. But after adding the panels, should he do another subwoofer crawl? And he should definitely rerun Odyssey, right? Yeah, you should do both.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't hurt. I mean, again, because even the big super chunks and monster bass traps, they're not getting down to 20 hertz. They'll get down to 70 hertz if you're lucky. But I mean, primarily most of what you're carrying is coming out of your sub shouldn't really be affected even by the big bass traps. The chances that a subwoofer crawl is going to reveal a tremendous difference, I wouldn't expect it. But at the same time, how difficult is it really? You do another sub crawl and you find out. So
you take that other monster trap and you put it on top of the monster trap that's over the sub. That's what you do with that.
Yeah, so you stack them. You stack the 2 monster traps on top of the sub, and then you have a super chunk that you build yourself in the opposite corner there. Sure, I can get behind that. But yeah, I would say it doesn't hurt. I wouldn't expect the subwoofer crawl to reveal tremendously big differences, but definitely run Odyssey again. Definitely.
Yeah. And buy another sub. Okay, so no, you don't have to buy another sub.
How come we don't tell people to spend money, Tom? How come we don't tell people to spend money?
Well, we're only suggesting $500 subs, not $10,000
JBLs. We didn't say to replace the power cords
JL
either. It's heresy.
You need a $1,000 power cord.
Cheap.
For your lamp. Alan heard us talk about Ohm Walsh speakers a few episodes ago.
Yep, it came up.
Was that?
I don't remember if you were here or not, but we definitely talked about it.
I don't think so. You recalled a review of the Ohm Walsh 200 Mark II Towers speakers in the Audio Critic magazine from 2003. They published a whole bunch of measurements as well as an explanation of the Walsh driver design, plus the normal description of setup and listening impressions. The measurements indicated that below 1 kilohertz, the speaker really was almost completely omnidirectional with fairly linear response down to 40 hertz, which lined up with the port tuning. About 1 kilohertz, the speaker was more directional. Oh, it was omnidirectional.
Yeah, below 1 kilohertz, omnidirectional. Above 1 kilohertz, more directional. Was
more directional with the unusual characteristic of essentially aiming its treble 45 degrees to the inside towards a centrally located listener. That lined up with the way the tweeter was mounted inside at a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, whatever. The reviewer talks about how they play low enough not to need a subwoofer. Of course they do. And it also points out how the Walsh 200 towers definitely have a distinct character with advantages and disadvantages. It was primarily compared with some B&W 801 speakers, which themselves have
but
a character.
They kept saying the B&W 801 sound more linear than these Ohm Walshes, so there was that. Or more neutral. I think they used the word neutral. Yep.
So Alan just wanted to know what we think of that review. Does having all those measurements inform or change our opinions at all, since we said that we hadn't heard the Walsh speakers for ourselves, but had our doubts about the design? It must have been when Lee was here.
It very well might have been, yeah. So the Ohm Walsh speaker, to remind people, it uses a traditional cone, but it's a very deep cone, right? A very pitched cone that goes in quite a bit. And they actually have it fire straight down into the body of the cabinet, and then the back surface of the cone is what actually radiates the sound. Now, the original Walsh design, that was it. It was one driver, no crossover, nothing. One driver produced all the sound, and then they were like, what about treble? So they eventually added a tweeter to it. But they're like, the whole point of the Walsh driver was to be omnidirectional. So like, well, to get a tweeter to not sound two directional, they basically positioned it so it's firing in at 45 degrees, like a pair of speakers that have been really heavily towed in. And then the current ones also have the tweeter kind of firing up a bit so that you're not getting any on axis ever, right? That's the omnidirectional thing, right? It's always firing off axis at you. So it's a odd design. It's not one that I don't tend to back speakers that no recording studio anywhere in the world uses a speaker like that. Because I'm like, the people making it never heard it on a speaker like that. So, the argument that that's how it should be played back always makes me suspicious. But nevertheless, those were my doubts about the design. Now, coming back and saying, okay, you've got all these measurements that are saying, well, it doesn't measure too badly. Now, they had the whole thing where if you consider on axis to be 45 degrees off axis, because that's where the tweeter is, and then you go 15 to 30 degrees to the left of that, so like getting close to 90 degrees straight across, and then 15 to 30 degrees to the outside, meaning essentially firing straight forward now. That within that window, the treble looked pretty okay and actually quite uniform across that window. So I guess if you just rotated the whole speaker, like anti-towed it in, now it's essentially got treble response like you would expect from facing the tweeter that way. But then below 1 kilohertz, it gets pretty wild in its dispersion. It's basically omnidirectional. And the reviewer talked about, oh yes, sometimes it sounded more open, but other times it made it difficult to tell exactly where the sound was coming from, or it became more nebulous or cloudy or whatever. There was a whole bunch of subjective terms. The listening impressions seemed pretty useless to me in the description in this review, because they just love to talk about, this is the type of music I'm listening to, and here's where it excels, but it's not so great for female vocals, but it's good for this particular instrument. I'm like,
right, when you can't talk about a speaker, you talk about the music that you're listening
that's
to.
right. But in particular, Alan, my impression of the review itself was, wow, that was a lot of words and description about the measurements that were taken, which makes it sound like, oh, this is someone who knows what they're talking about. Look at the technical detail they went into about the specifications of the equipment they used to measure and blah, 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 blah. It was all done in a room. All the measurements were taken in a room. So I don't care about any of those measurements. It only applies to that one guy's room.
Well,
I mean,
so
that's what it was.
Herein lies the real problem with what I would call the audiophile speaker designs. And I don't use audiophile as a descriptor here. Like I consider myself to be an audiophile. I consider Rob to be an audiophile.
I love audio.
We care.
We
love audio.
As the definition of the word, audiophile is someone who loves audio. Yes, by that definition, we are audiophiles. We love audio.
But when I'm talking about audiophile products, I'm talking about products that are geared to sell to people who love audio and want to feel special.
Seems to be
because of it. And that comes down to your special power cables, your special, turntable, $10,000 turntables, your crazy equipment racks that everything's on mushrooms like balls, silver balls or whatever, because somehow that does something. The clever little clock, the things, all these things, are meant to be exclusionary.
Right.
Like I have bought this speaker that you didn't even know existed, and this is why it's important, and this is why it's much better than any of the speakers that you have. To a certain extent, Bose started off really very strongly in this camp. We have a speaker that is of a design that you've never seen before. It's completely different than anything else, and therefore it's superior, and let us tell you why. And that is an audiophile product. I mean, maybe not anymore. Bose is a lot more mainstream, but they still, this idea that an audiophile product is something that is totally different than anything
Right.
else, and you've
It's almost
never
always
heard
has
of
to be
it.
special, unusual in some way.
Therefore, they can't just sell a normal design speaker. It's got to be something. And you see this on like Facebook posts
Sure.
from audio magazines all the time. Oh, here's the audiophile speaker of today, and the thing looks like it's going to snap in half because it's got woofers on top, and it goes down to this little itty bitty tweeter in the center, and then big woofers in the bottom. It's like two triangles stacked on top of each other. You're like, that's just dumb. It's a dumb design. It looks dumb. It doesn't look like it's, there's any reason for it to be that way. And yet it is, and it is because you want to feel special because of this speaker. And this is what this type of speaker is. I'm not speaking specifically about the Ohm Walsh in that I'm speaking about audiophile speakers in general, which is they've got to have something unique. They've got to have something different. They've got to have something that you've never seen before. They've got to be super expensive because if not, then why?
And I mean, the ohms aren't crazy. They're in the $1,000 to $5,000 range, so they're not outlandish in that sense. But I mean, interestingly, the one thing that that some people might have keyed on in that review was talking about the particular way that they were able to image and create a wider than normal sweet spot. And that is something where, I mean, it was ages ago on this podcast that I talked about it, but the trial of heavily towing in your front, left, and right speakers. This is something worth experimenting. If you want to have some fun in your system, you don't want to spend any money, but you're like, I want to try something a little bit different and see the results for myself. This is something anybody can try with your front, left, and right speakers, is heavily towing them in so that, if there were straight lines coming out of the tweeters, those lines would cross well in front of where you are as the listener. It's worth giving a try. With any pair of speakers, because sometimes you do get the effect of if you move yourself to the left or right of the perfect in the middle spot. With heavily towed in speakers, you actually get that wider sensation of a wider sweet spot because you're actually getting more direct sound from the speaker that's farther away from you, because you're basically on axis, right? If you're sitting to the left, you're essentially on axis to the right speaker, but you're off axis to the left speaker. So when that Haas effect and that precedence effect combine with the louder direct sound and the off-axis but earlier arriving sound, you sort of get a better phantom center effect, even though you yourself are sitting off of where the phantom center would be perfectly positioned. So having these 45-degree built-in tweeters, that's what was causing that. Nothing to do with the omnidirectional downward firing cone. It had nothing to do with that. The imaging was all about those angled tweeters. But that's a cool thing to take away from the review that you can try with any pair of speakers.
Yeah, I guess my real reservation for a lot of these types of speakers is whenever you come up with an unusual design, it requires you as the listener, as the owner, to make concessions because of it. I've got a guy who's got a friend of mine who's got these Bose speakers that have like the angled tweeters, and I'm like, and it's literally exactly, they're 45-degree angled. I used to have speakers that look like that too. They are and I'm like, hey man, I know they told you to do it this way, but if you switch the speakers so that the 45-degree tweeters are facing you instead of facing the outside wall, only one of which you actually have an outside wall, the other one's just firing into the kitchen, then it'll sound better. He's like, yeah, no. I'm like, okay. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. And can't even try it. And, when you have, if there was a reason for this, if there was a forward firing tweeter and a 45 tweeter or something like that, I would say, okay, well, clearly they're trying to do something here that's a little bit different, but it would make a little bit more sense to me. This is just, we're trying to overcome the limitations of our design in a way that, the people, they had put a 45-degree tweeter on here so that when you face these things forward, which is what you were always supposed to do, now suddenly you have some actual trouble coming at you instead of omnidirectional.
But I would say, Alan, as far as all that measurement stuff go, that it's a good lesson in don't allow a lot of words and a lot of detail to convince you that they must know what they're talking about.
Well, that's one thing you'll always find with the really high end, like the power cable.
Right.
There's never a paragraph long power cable review. Does not exist. It is pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages. And it's, about how that's why we as I mean, non-audiophile reviewers. I mean, I'm not reviewing those types of products. I always make fun of that because it's, my wife passed by and she noticed, and the dog noticed, and the neighbors next door noticed. And let me tell you about how it made me feel when I was making my Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, it's just a bunch of it's just talking you into if I say enough words, you'll just start believing me just because there's no way you could possibly make this much stuff up. Believe me, dude. People make up whole books. I do. Alan, different spelled and different Alan. Alan has a dedicated, fully light-controlled theater with plans for a 120-inch screen. He'll mostly use his projector for TV and movies, but he also wants to be able to play games, and he doesn't want lag latency to be an issue. With the projector? All right, then. He'd be willing to spend upwards of $4,000, though. Closer to $2,000 would be not. $3,000 would be nice. So, which projector would we recommend, and what specs should he look for in order to tell if a particular model would be good for gaming? I mean, you're looking for latency. I mean, somebody's going to have something like that on there.
If you're just going to the manufacturer's website or the specs that are listed on Amazon or whatnot, there you almost certainly won't find a spec on the spec sheet.
Right, but somebody's going to have.
Yeah, so you'd want to look at a review and go to Projector Central or go to projectorreviews.com. Both of those places, they are now measuring the latency. So that's a response of, I pressed a button on the controller. How long did it take for, that to actually show up on screen? So both of those places that review almost every home theater projector that comes out, they are measuring latency these days. So Projector Central and Projector Reviews, great place to check out. Now, I'm going to point you directly to Epson's 5050 UB. Certainly fits your price point. It's $2,700, so it's...
I was going to say, it's
under $3,000. It's definitely under $4,000. And these days, you kind of have to go over $4,000 to get anything that I might even consider better in any respect, JVCs or possibly a Sony, I guess. But the Epson 5050 UB, it's about 24 milliseconds of latency, which is not the best that's out there, right? There are things that are like 16 milliseconds, but 24 milliseconds of latency is not bad. It's pretty darn decent, and in every other way, the Epson 5050 completely checks all the boxes. It accepts 4K signals at 60 frames a second with high dynamic range. So as far as gaming on your Xbox One S or X, sending that out, checks all the boxes there. Good performance in all ways. He's talking about a 120-inch screen. It's got the light output to handle that even in HDR. And it has a nice feature with HDR, which... okay, it's not the equal of what JVC is offering now. JVC with actual dynamic tone mapping, which I love that they're doing that, but the projectors that have that are well over, they start at $6,000, so way over your budget to get one of the JVCs that has that. What Epson has is a button on the remote. You press that button, and it gives you a slider to darken or brighten the HDR image as a whole. Love that. You get 16 steps of that. So whatever the movie is, and you don't even have to dig through settings in the menu, it's one button on the remote, and you can make your HDR look lovely no matter what the movie. So 5050 UB, if you're super competitive, maybe 24 milliseconds is still too long. But he says it's mostly about TV and movies and just not bad for games. I would consider that perfect.
Okay. Let me see here. So what screen do we recommend these days? I mean, if it's 120 inch and it's just gonna be on your wall.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if it's just going to be a regular frame that you mount on your wall, completely grab a silver ticket.
I mean, he's going to be 120 inches. He didn't say how far away he was sitting, right? No. But he's certainly not going to be sitting close enough to 120 that you have to worry about seeing weaves or anything like that. So
he didn't mention acoustically transparent at all. So, I mean, if you're talking a standard white fixed frame screen, absolutely silver ticket. Now, I will just mention, if you want a motorized screen at a pretty decent price, that's where we'd probably point you to Elite Screens, right? And if you want the absolute best in an acoustically transparent screen, we'd point you to Seymour AV. But yeah, if it's just a standard white screen with a fixed frame, silver ticket.
Okay. Oh, Infinite Gary. Okay, Infinite Gary. Gary sends us an article about the efforts of the Olympic broadcasting services ahead of the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. They have stated their goal is to provide 5.1.4 immersive audio from all 45 venues. There will be 85 separate 5.1.4 audio feeds handled by 120 audio engineers, all being sent out live along with HDR Ultra HD video. But a major wrinkle is that different countries are using different audio codecs. Many countries will be using Dolby Atmos via Dolby's AC4 codec, while the European Broadcast Union and China have decided to use MPEG-H. For that reason, OBS says, which is freaking me out because that's what we use to
no, that's the Olympic Broadcasting Services, OBS, yes.
Yeah. Says they have decided to send out a 5.1.4 channel-based feed, which each broadcaster can then encode as necessary. So a 5.1.4 channel-based feed.
They're not going to do objects. They're like, we got 9 speaker channels and a LFE.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, that does make sense. But now we're not dealing with...
Yeah, we're not moving things around with coordinates anymore. We've just got 9 fixed locations.
And we don't know which of those 4. The 5, we know where they're going to be. But what you'll get is no sound out of your surround backs.
Right, if you just play it straight. Yeah.
Yeah, because they will have encoded it into some sort of... anyways, okay, we'll keep going here. They're using all new microphones, production workflows, and modifying existing mixing consoles and meters, plus attempting to train the 120 staff members, most of whom have never dealt with live immersive audio before because no one has. So Gary wonders, how do we think all this will play out? I mean, we'll find out in 2020, but if they're actually placing sound into channels, what do we think will be coming from overhead? Do we expect any terrible or amusing glitches? Are we going to be watching swimmers as though we're in the stands, but hearing it all as though we are underwater?
No, it depends on where they put the microphones. I mean, basically, they're going to have fixed microphone locations, 9 of them, and that's pretty much that, right? That's kind of the way it goes.
Well, this ends up being the issue is if they encode it as into channels, which channels are they using overhead? And then if they take those channels and then whoever you're getting it from just takes that and says, okay, wrap that or slam that into an Atmos container the way that the Xbox One does it, then then if the channels they're using are top fronts, top rears, 5.1,
which they almost certainly will be.
So then you people with front heights and top middles will be getting nothing.
Well,
all surround backs would be getting nothing.
No, I mean, the renderer should still make sounds come out, but they might not be ideally placed. Because if
not if it's already in an Atmos container.
No, but that's the thing. Coming from the Olympic Broadcasting Services themselves, it isn't in any container yet. So they're leaving it up to the broadcasters to then... So, I mean, what they're feeding them is channels which will appear to the broadcaster as stems. And then the broadcaster can take those stems and encode them however they like. So, I mean, essentially what you're getting is you're getting this stem of audio that was only recorded in one fixed location above you, say your front left top front speaker, right? It's got that one location. The people using Dolby Atmos can just say, okay, that's the stem, and we're just going to place it there. That's the coordinates we're going to give it, and those coordinates are never going to move or change. So it's stuck in that location, exactly the way like Wonder Woman was encoded on Blu-ray, where it's encoded in Atmos, but they just gave you 4 fixed locations similar to channels, and that's what you had. Now, if you played Wonder Woman through a system where you had not top fronts and top rears, you still got those sounds because your Atmos decoder in your AV receiver still says, here are these overhead stems. I'm going to place them as well as I'm able to, but they won't come from the correct locations. So yeah, I mean, to do this as a channel-based system, they're basically just going to have 9 fixed microphones in each of these venues. And that's what you're going to get.
Well, I mean, I think there's talk. The way it sounds like, based on what I just read, is that they're going to have multiple microphones all the way around, and then when you change camera angles, that'll be grabbing the different mics that are there. I'm just worried that they're going to send out channel-based, and then if that's not encoded into an object-based where they're actual objects, if it's just encoded into the the way, like you said, the way that Wonder Woman was done, you're going to end up with, like Xbox One, it's going to be channels unused because they're not the right.
Not impossible. Yeah, that could be. I do think, Gary, that I mean, since everybody's new to this, including the broadcasters are completely new to this, right?
Oh, yeah.
I do think that we
Yeah.
might have some glitches occur. That is certainly. I mean, somebody just takes the wrong channel stem and puts it in the wrong location, and the announcer's voice is coming out of your surround left channel now because it's all new, and they're going through. I mean, they're having to double up. They're having to take their standard 5.1 mixers, but use 2 of them, right? Because now they're dealing with 10 channels.
Right.
Including the LFE. So yeah, I can imagine things getting steered incorrectly, not necessarily even by OBS, by the broadcasters that they feed it to, who are then encoding it in whatever format they use. Yes, I could foresee some amusing or bad glitches happening. I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
More details about Samsung's displays efforts to convert their South Korean manufacturing facilities from LCD to QD OLEDs have been announced. As reported previously, both their South Korean LCD facilities, both of their LCD facilities are shutting down immediately, leaving only their Chinese LCD factory in operation. The new information is that mass production of QD OLED at these 2 facilities won't begin until 2022. Yeah. Samsung Display is investing almost $11 billion in this transition, and in the end, they say they'll be producing only a little more than half as many QD OLED substrates as their number of LCD substrates being made today. They claim their use of 3 blue OLED emitters per pixel plus layers of green and red quantum dots will allow them to produce QD OLED TVs that use fewer layers, lower material costs, and have higher yields than LG's WRGB OLEDs, but they admit they still face several technical challenges. So Gary wonders, after all of that, what all this means for consumers. It means that we have to learn a bunch of acronyms because I know no one understood anything I just said because I read it and I didn't understand it. It looks as though OLED is here to stay, right?
Yeah.
There's no way Samsung would be investing this much if they didn't foresee a future for OLED TVs, right? But if they can't make as many OLEDs as LCDs, will OLED prices ever get as low as LCD? LCDs used to be the most expensive thing out there. Now they're the least expensive thing because they've been there for so long. It's just the way it works. What about other TV technologies? Lots of people got excited about micro LEDs, including you. But LG just built their huge OLED facility in China, and now there's the Samsung news. Will OLEDs eventually flood the market? Yeah. Remember when we had plasmas and they were awesome, and then LCD killed them because LCD sucked and it had better marketing.
Cheaper. LCDs got cheaper than plasmas, no question about that.
That is 100% what's going to happen here because OLEDs are better. They are just better, and they're going to get cheaper, and that's what's going to happen. And they're going to kill LCDs, and that's what's
now
going to happen.
I don't know about that because it's not as though they're across the world, everybody is halting LCD production. That is not stopping. And we have these new advances of using like 2 LCDs in a TV, one that's just black and white to essentially act as per pixel dimming, and then a color LCD. So that's another way that LCD can continue in this market. A little bit more expensive and a little bit more complex, obviously with 2 layers, but using, still LCD production. So these things can continue. I'm happy about all this news for OLED. I think what it is, of course, people who are not super hyped about OLED, they're worried about the burn-in. That's why they're like, oh, micro LEDs, they won't have any burn-in. So, that's going to be a major advantage while still being self-emissive and bright and wide color and all that. But we know the micro LEDs are not going to get down to the sizes and the prices probably for about 10 years, right? That's what we're looking at there.
Right.
So in the interim, for the next 10 years, what is it going to be? It's going to be OLED, right? It's going to be OLED. LG has invested billions in OLED. Samsung is investing $11 billion in their version of OLED. Yeah, OLEDs are going to be the thing, I think. I mean, all of our mobile displays are going OLED, right? Our laptops are starting to go OLED at this point. That's going to be it for the next 10 years.
And I mean, we have talked a lot about micro LEDs as being something that we're excited about. I mean, we are excited about that direction that we're going. I'm just excited about anything that makes us not have to talk about how many Ks something has. I'm kind of over that. I still wish we wouldn't talk about watts and receivers, but I can dream. But again, I think going to be where projectors end up going. And I like that too. So we'll see where we end up. Dan, we have discussed CD quality versus high-res audio and explained how the 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz format is capable of delivering everything our human ears can perceive. But how does all that stuff apply to the various surround formats, such as going on from Dolby Digital, such as going from Dolby Digital to Dolby Digital Plus to True HD to Atmos? Does Dan have it right that regular Dolby Digital is 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz, while True HD is 24-bit 96 kilohertz? I don't think that's right. Why use an audio format that takes up more space if it isn't really necessary or beneficial? And if you buy a movie or on DVD and then on Blu-ray and then on Ultra HD Blu-ray, even though it's the same movie, there can sometimes be obviously noticeable differences in the audio. So is all that down to the mastering, like we said, for CDs versus high res, or do the actual formats themselves have anything to do with how the movie audio sounds? So I didn't get to this question before so I'm going to think about this one a little bit. But I mean, you need more space for more channels. I mean, that's just the way it
that,
works.
and there's lossy versus lossless. So there's a lot to unpack because if you're someone who is looking at the tremendous number of numbers like 16-bit versus 24-bit and 44.1 kilohertz versus 48 kilohertz versus 96 and 192 and 384 and on and on and on. If you're looking at all these numbers and then you're also getting inundated by numbers like 128 kilobits per second, 256 kilobits per second, 320 kilobits per second, and you're on top of all that, you're getting names, Dolby Digital, DTS, Dolby Digital Plus, DTS HD, Master Audio, on and on and on. And you're trying to say, well, what actually equates to good audio versus great audio or excellent audio versus not so great audio? Like, how do I line up quality with some of these numbers or some of these names? And I wish it were as simple as this number equals this quality, but it isn't.
Right.
All right. So what we kind of need to do to simplify this is let's talk about what is first recorded, right? If we're talking about what is first recorded and without getting too complex into, filters and stuff like that, if we were able to limit the sound that is coming into the microphone only to the range of frequencies and the safe decibel levels for our human ears, then doing all of that at 44.1 kilohertz using 16 bits of data per sample would allow us to capture all that, all right? So the mic, if none of the sound is beyond what the human ear can hear is what's reaching the microphone, then 16-bit 44.1, that is enough to capture all of that. Now that's our little bundle of audio that we can hear. Now we have to decide how many channels of that audio are there. And so, more channels means more data. That's pretty easy to comprehend. But then we have to talk about how are we going to compress that data? Are we going to compress it not at all? So an example of more than 2 channels of CD quality audio, 16-bit 44.1, with no compression at all, that's something that could have been found on a Super Audio CD or a DVD audio disc. Those were just uncompressed digital audio, sometimes at CD quality, sometimes at, so-called higher than CD quality, but without any data compression applied to them. It was just the raw stuff. Then we could also talk about compressing it in a way that loses no information. You compress it, then you have some kind of decoder that decompresses it, and after that process, you're exactly bit for bit to the original audio. That's what Dolby True HD or DTS HD Master Audio does. They are lossless. It's also what FLAC does, or Apple Lossless, ALAC, right? They take the original audio, they shrink the file size, but then after you put it through the decoder, it blows it back up, and nothing has changed. It's exactly the same. But then there's lossy compression, where you crunch it down and you blow it back up, having gone through the decoder, but what comes back out is not the same. Some information has been lost. And that would include Dolby Digital. It would include Dolby Digital Plus. It would include DTS, and it would include DTS HD. What's the one that's not Master Audio? DTS HD High Resolution.
Oh, I haven't heard
all
that
of
one.
those
I
are
guess I have.
lossy. So Dolby Digital Plus is not as lossy as Dolby Digital. DTS HD high resolution is not as lossy as vanilla DTS, but those are compression formats where you crunched it down, you put it through the decoder, blew it back up, but what came back out, it is not exactly the same as the original audio. Now, going back to all the 16-bit versus 24-bit or 44.1 kilohertz versus 96 kilohertz, that has nothing to do with the codec that we put it into. That's all. What was the original audio? The original audio was 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz, 8 channels of it, whatever it was, right? And then we put it into a container like Dolby Digital Plus or Dolby True HD.
And what comes off of a CD is wave, isn't it?
It's just PCM. Yeah. It's just straight PCM audio, 2 channels of it at 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. So we've got this original audio, then we've got how did we shrink it down? If we shrunk it down, when we blow it back up, has anything been lost or not? Those are sort of all the variables that we're dealing with here. So like on a DVD, the audio there was probably 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, because that's what movies all use. All movies use 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. That was the original audio that they did. Why are they using more than 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz? Well, that's kind of a whole other discussion that we could get into one day. But suffice it to say, that's the format that they decide. That's their raw audio. On a DVD, they threw it into a Dolby Digital or a DTS container, which means it's lossy. It means after the decoding process, information has been lost. And sometimes they didn't use the maximum amount of data that Dolby Digital or DTS could use. Sometimes, like an MP3, they chose to shrink it even more, to lose even more data, to make the file size even smaller. And that's what you get on a DVD. On Blu-ray, we got the lossless formats. We got Dolby True HD and DTS HD Master Audio. Still the same original 48 kilohertz, 24-bit audio, but they put it into a container that didn't lose any information now. Shrunk it down, blew it back up, but it came out exactly the same as the original. And sometimes that's enough to hear some small differences, especially on the heavily compressed Dolby Digital stuff. You could actually hear some of that compression like you can on a heavily compressed MP3. But more often than not, they remastered the audio for the Blu-ray release versus the DVD release, because the DVD release was almost certainly 5.1 and the Blu-ray was probably 7.1. Most of them were, and they remastered it.
Yeah. After the first couple of months of those formats being out, everything.
And then beyond all that, if you want to talk Atmos and DTS-X, unfortunately, those things, the easiest way to think of them, it's not completely correct to say it this way, but the easiest way to think of them is as extensions that are on top of something like Dolby Digital Plus or Dolby True HD, because Atmos doesn't tell you whether it's lossy or lossless. DTS-X doesn't tell you if it's lossy or lossless. It just tells you that now it can put sounds overhead if you have an Atmos or a DTS-X decoder. It's still going to be in either a lossy or a lossless container. So there's Dolby Digital Plus with Atmos. There's Dolby True HD with Atmos. So saying Atmos is like the new container, not really. It's an extension on top of the existing containers. I don't know if that clears anything up.
Yeah, clear as mud. So again, it's I guess the short version of this is, we know that some of them are lossy and some of them are lossless. We think that the Atmos and the DTS-X are the lossless version with the basically metadata that tells them where to put the objects and that sort of thing. We're not 100%. We can't know for sure, but
I mean, on the physical Ultra HD Blu-ray discs, so far, they've done a pretty good job of labeling that this is Dolby True HD Atmos. So you're like, okay, it's a lossless container with Atmos extensions. Usually, if it's DTS-X, it'll say this is DTS-X Master, which means... Yeah.
And what comes off your CD, because we were talking about that, when it comes off your CD is PCM. So there is
no container, no compression at all. It's just the raw digital audio.
Right. So if you were going to take it off, your computer would naturally either want to put it into a container that was lossy, or you would have to force it. Usually it defaults MP3s because...
File size.
Whatever. You would have to force it into something that was either less lossy or lossless, like a wave, which is lossless bit for bit,
uncompressed
PCM,
as
no
well.
compression. Yeah, it is, or something like
Mm-hmm.
FLAC or one of the other lossless compression codecs, which will save you size. A FLAC will get you about half,
Right.
half the size, but it's still quite big compared to what you get when you get an MP3.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when Dan
MP3.
was asking about, about the bit rate and the sampling, isn't Dolby True HD 24-bit 96 kilohertz? Nope. It certainly doesn't have to be. It usually isn't. It's usually 24-bit 48 kilohertz because, like I say, it goes back to the original audio. But there was 24-bit 96 kilohertz DTS, the old DTS, before any of these lossless formats existed.
And if you have like something, if your player, and not all players will do this, if they have like an info button, a lot of times they'll tell you what the bit rate is, but it's not informative of the quality of the audio. It doesn't tell you anything about the audio, whether it's compressed or not. It doesn't tell you how it was mastered. It just tells you, what it's putting out. When we're talking about the bit rate of CDs and how it can contain everything that you can hear, it's a different discussion than what we're having.
Yes,
as far as
it's not a way to evaluate how good it's going to sound. Yeah,
right. It could still sound like Oasis.
That's right.
When it comes out of that CD.
Yeah, I mean,
and then you're stuck with Oasis, and which is highly compressed, highly not file size compressed, but dynamic range compression.
So I mean, if you ask, is Dolby True HD better than Dolby Digital? Well, we can tell you objectively, if you're using Dolby Digital, you have lost some information compared to the original audio. That is a fact. Right. That is a lossy format.
If you took two files and took them, two pieces of music, and you put them into those two file containers, and then took them out of those two file containers, they would not be identical any longer.
So in that sense,
could you hear the difference?
Right. Yeah, that is a completely different thing. It is entirely possible to put a worse master into the lossless container. So what went in and what came out, they're identical, but unfortunately it was crappy. So
and I like Oasis fine, for all you guys out there who are like, why does he keep bagging on Oasis? I bag on Oasis because they were the ones that made dynamic range compression so popular, and they are kind of the reason why we're dealing with very little dynamic range. Even though I think it's very important that we have dynamic range compression, like we use it on this podcast, so that people aren't like, how come I can't hear you when you're whispering? Well, it's because we continue to have dynamic range. I used to keep a lot of dynamic range in this podcast. I used to keep a lot of that stuff, and I got so many complaints. I was like, fine, I'll just compress the crap out of it like everybody else.
And
it's because you're listening to it in your car.
And for two people talking, that's really not too much of a step backwards. So that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I will agree with. So one of the things, Dan, talking about these bit rates and sampling rates and that, one of the things I will agree with is that I think the easiest way for us to get, so whatever the mastering guys did, right? If we just hate what they did, well, there's not much we can do about that. But if what we want is to say, okay, we trust that the mastering guys got this sounding the way they want it to sound, now I just want to hear what they heard, that the fewer steps in between what they created and the file that we play back, probably the better, right? The fewer opportunities for something to have been messed with in any way, probably the better. So if what they created in their studio was a 24-bit 96 kilohertz master, because a lot of them are, right? When you're working and manipulating the audio, it's often beneficial just mathematically, not audibly, but mathematically, to have more bits to work with. So if that's what they created, and then we don't necessarily want the file size of just this massive multi-channel 24-bit 96 kilohertz thing. We want to make a smaller file size, but we use a lossless compression. The file size is smaller, but we lose no data. I mean, yes, I will agree. That's probably better. That's probably better than someone having to translate it down to a lower bit rate and lower sampling rate, because you gotta just set the filters correct. It's not difficult, but could something get screwed up? Yeah, something could get screwed up. So the less we have to change it, I agree, probably the better.
All right, who's
Carl.
left?
That was it from this week. We pretty much caught
All
up.
right,
That's
Carl.
good. Carl's on the list, and then a few questions came in, of course, on Monday. But yeah, we're doing good.
If you want your question answered, just email us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our donor, Kevin, who went to AVRant.com.
Well, if you say it, it's not going to hurt anything. If someone did type
I know,
www.
I'm trying to get away from it. I've been saying it only that way for 10 years, 12 years, something like that. He went to AVRant.com, clicked on the buy us a cup of coffee link, and left us a PayPal donation. So
yes,
thank you,
Kevin. Thank you very much for the donation. Appreciated. Even if you didn't type www.
We also want to thank our 86 patrons over at Patreon.com.
Yep, patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. And thanks very much to our 86 patrons over there.
For AV Rant, I'm Tom
And
Andry.
I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.